Normandy, June 1944. 5 men climb into a steel box about 9 feet tall and 8.5 feet wide and pull the hatches shut over their heads. Packed in around their legs, under the loader's boots, and along both walls beside them are 97 rounds of 75 millimetre ammunition. Each one carries over 2 kilograms of fast-burning propellant. Add 6,750 rounds of machine gun ammunition, 5 gallons of drinking water, and 2 days of rations for 5 men. Then they close the hatches and drive toward a hedgerow. Hold 3 things for the next few minutes. First, the most dangerous object in that tank was not the German gun outside it. It was already inside, and the Army proved it with a controlled test that most people have never heard about. Second, almost everything you have been told about this tank burning is either a myth with no wartime evidence or a real fact attached to the wrong cause. And third, when the Army actually counted the bodies, the number that came back was not the number anyone expects. This is how 5 men ate, slept, and stayed alive inside an M4 Sherman. Start with where the bodies go, because the geometry decides everything else. 3 men sit in the turret. The gunner is forward and low on the right, his face against the sight. The commander sits directly behind and above him at the back right, close enough to touch him. On the left of the gun, opposite the gunner, is the loader, and by the standards of this vehicle, he is the one with room to move. Below them in the hull, 2 more. The driver at front left, the assistant driver at front right, who also works the bow machine gun. The driver's forward periscope is fixed. It does not move. Now the detail that tells you what this crew's life was actually like. On the early 75 millimetre Shermans, the loader had no hatch of his own. Every other man had an opening directly over his head, spring-loaded to take the weight. The loader did not. To get out, he had to go around the gun and up through the commander's hatch. A loader's hatch was added in October of 1943, which means for the first stretch of this tank's war, there was a man inside it whose only exit ran past another man's body and around a gun breech. And the early turret made that worse. It had a mesh screen enclosing the turret basket, open at only 2 points to the hull below, which meant the ammunition stored in the sponsons along the walls could only be reached when the turret was pointed at certain bearings. Turn the turret to fight, and some of your own ammunition became unreachable. So where was all of it? The technical manual is very specific. 15 rounds in the left sponson, forward of the water can rack, 17 rounds in the right sponson, right next to the assistant driver, 15 more in the right sponson, forward of the engine bulkhead, and the rest on the floor of the fighting compartment, under the crew. Now hold that picture, because the first thing I ask you to remember is about to pay off. The Sherman got a reputation early for catching fire, and the British reported it often enough that U.S. ordnance went and tested it properly. They took Shermans, removed all the ammunition, and shot them. Penetration after penetration. Frequent fires did not result. Then they ran it the other way, full ammunition load, and every trace of fuel and oil removed, and the tanks burned. It was never the gasoline engine. It was the ammunition, sitting in the sponsons and on the floor around the men. A round of tank ammunition is a metal tube containing 2 kilograms of propellant, engineered to burn extremely fast, and there were 97 of them in the room. So the Army moved them. What the crews called wet stowage took the ammunition out of the walls and put it in liquid-filled boxes on the hull floor, below the turret. The liquid was water mixed with ethylene glycol antifreeze and a rust inhibitor, and the mixture had a name, Amadamp. 10 boxes on the floor of a 75 millimetre tank held 100 rounds. The Tank Museum at Bobington gives the numbers. Early Shermans were estimated to burn between 60 and 80% of the time when their armor was penetrated, and the museum immediately adds the context that almost nobody repeats. That was similar to other tanks of the period. After wet stowage, the rate dropped dramatically to around 15%. And while we are here, let me kill the thing you have almost certainly heard. The story goes that the Sherman was nicknamed the Ronson after a lighter whose slogan was, "Lights first, every time." Researchers have gone looking for that advertisement repeatedly, and nobody has produced it. There is no wartime document, no war diary, no prisoner report, no contemporary journal that calls the Sherman a Ronson. By every account I can find, the nickname is post-war. It attached itself to a real problem after the fact, and then outlived the men who solved the problem. Now the air. Every time that gun fires, propellant gas vents backward into the compartment, because tanks of this era had no system to purge the barrel. Turret ventilators were fitted specifically to clear it, and they were not enough. Clarence Smoyer was a gunner with the 3rd Armored Division, promoted from loader in August of 1944, and he described firing plainly. It shakes you up, inside and out. The recoil of the gun rattles you to your bones. 5 men, a sealed steel room, and a gun that fills it with smoke every time it speaks. They talk to each other through an interphone box mounted at every station, wired into the radio set. Only the commander could transmit outside the tank. The other 4 could speak only to each other, inside the box, over an engine. Which brings us to how you eat in there. The right rear sponson carried 2 days of rations for 5 men. The manual gives the capacity precisely. 30 boxes of K rations, or 60 cans of C rations, or 2 of the much larger D rations. A 5-gallon water can rode in the right sponson. But the eating did not happen inside. It happened during the brew-up. And that ritual is the most human thing in this entire story. The crews built a stove out of a cut-down petrol or water tin, filled it about halfway with sand, and soaked the sand with fuel. That was called a Benghazi burner. On it they made tea, and the break itself took the name of the ritual, a brew-up. So the day looked like this. Awake around 4 in the morning for tea and breakfast, maintenance on the tank, into combat by 6 or 7, in action through the day with very little relief, pulled back at dusk for more maintenance and the next day's briefing, and then sleep. And here the sources genuinely disagree, so I will not pretend otherwise. The most common documented practice is that crews slept outside, in a row beside their own tank under a tarpaulin, not inside it. The vehicle was the landmark and the shelter and the reason they were a target. And men who had spent 14 hours sealed inside it did not choose to spend the night there too. Then there's the question everyone wants answered, and nobody asks out loud. What is documented is this. Spent shell casings were used as makeshift bedpans to urinate into, and severe constipation was extremely common among tank crews. That second half is the part that tells you the truth of it. When the only option is that difficult, the body simply stops cooperating for days. Now the hedgerows, because Normandy is what made the box worse. The U.S. Army's own combat lessons described a hedgerow as an earthen mound or wall 8 to 10 feet in width and 4 to 6 feet in height, covered with scrub undergrowth. Not a fence, a wall of packed earth with a thicket growing out of it, running around every small field in the region. A tank trying to climb one exposed its belly to whatever was waiting on the other side. So Sergeant Curtis Cullen welded huge iron teeth cut from German beach obstacles onto the front of a Sherman so it could cut through instead of climbing over. General Bradley ordered as many tanks fitted as possible, and by the launch of Operation Cobra in late July, 3 out of every 5 Shermans had them, and the Army recorded what that terrain cost. With the enemy well concealed in the hedgerows, it took an average of 5 Americans to displace 1 German defender, where 3 to 1 would normally have sufficed. While we are in Normandy, let me deal with the other myth, because it belongs to this ground. The claim that it took 5 Shermans to kill 1 tiger is not doctrine, and it never was. The historian Stephen Zaloga puts it bluntly, that the popular myths of a 5-to-1 ratio have no basis at all in the historical records. American doctrine did not even assign Shermans that job. The Tank Destroyer Field Manual of June 1942 made destroying enemy tanks the primary mission of tank destroyer units, and the tanks in the separate battalions were there to help the infantry. Which brings us to the last thing I ask you to hold, and it is the number that reframes all of this. The U.S. First Army studied a sample of nearly 800 medium tanks knocked out between June of 1944 and May of 1945, and counted what happened to the men inside them. For each tank lost, an average of 1 crewman was killed or wounded. 1 out of 5. Read that again because it goes against every image the word Sherman brings to mind. When the tank died, 4 men usually got out. The armor worked, the hatches worked, the training worked. And there is a second number that sharpens it. A study of 300 tank casualties in Italy found that 64% of them happened when the men were outside their tank. The most dangerous moment in a tank crewman's day was not being sealed inside the box. It was leaving it, which is why the commander rode with his head out of the hatch in a war full of snipers and airburst shells, and why his crews wanted him to. A tank with every hatch down is a blind animal. The driver has a periscope that cannot turn. Everyone else is looking through a slit at whatever the turret happens to be facing. The crews judged blindness to be more dangerous than exposure, and the man with his head in the open air was the price of the other 4 being able to see. So picture it again one more time, honestly. 5 men in a 9-foot steel room, sitting on 100 rounds of ammunition, breathing their own gun smoke, urinating into shell casings, eating out of a fuel tin full of burning sand, sleeping in a row on the ground beside the machine because being inside it 1 hour longer was intolerable. In fields 400 yards across, walled by earth, where every gap in a hedge might be the last one. And on the day the tank finally took a hit that killed it, 4 of them, on average, climbed out and walked away. If you want more of these, subscribe.